Hi, my name is Daniela Palmieri, and I'm going to be talking about Chapter 3, Section 1. This chapter begins by asking a question such as, how do these types of learning actually work? This chapter takes a look at the mechanisms of classical conditioning. Pavlov's experiment simplified some observations made by Stefan Wolfson. Wolfson was studying how the dogs salivated in response to a number of different things that were put into its mouth. Pavlov developed the procedure and introduced the terms that are still used today to describe it. He noticed the biologically significant stimulus, which was the food, had the power to elicit salivation unconditionally. The food is known as the unconditional stimulus, and because the drooling is the response to the food, was not conditional, drooling to the food was known as the unconditional response. The sound of the bell is what elicits salivation, therefore making the sound of the bell known as the conditioned stimulus. The response to the bell is known as the conditional response. Conditioned simply means learned. The next question is, what is learned in conditioning? Explanations of conditioning have assumed that the subject learns an association between two of the events in the experiment. Pavlov assumed that the dog came to associate the bell and food, and that the bell eventually elicited drooling because it was associated with the food. In other words, the dog knew that when he heard the bell, he knew that meant food was coming. His idea is known as the stimulus substitution theory. Most experiments suggest that the animal has learned to associate the CS with the US. For example, Robert Rescorla did an experiment with rats. He conditioned a fear of a light by pairing it with the sound of a klaxon, which is a very loud stimulus. After fear conditioning happened, one group of rats received exposure to the loud noise itself. The exposure then caused the rats to not fear the sound anymore. There are two variations on the simple conditioning experiment that further allow a CS to elicit a response even though it has never been directly associated with the US. Once a conditioned stimulus has been conditioned, the CS can serve as the US. This process is known as second-order conditioning. For example, a child who is bitten by a dog may associate the dog with the bite and become afraid of dogs. Sensory preconditioning is known as two neutral stimuli are first paired and then one is separately associated with the US. For example, a tone and light are paired in an initial stimulus, then the light becomes separately associated with food. In second-order conditioning, the tone could be associated with the response elicited by the light, but in sensory preconditioning, the same two stimuli are paired before the light ever has a reason to elicit the CR. There are some methods for studying classical conditioning. Classical conditioning research has focused on several standard examples of conditioning that are often referred to as conditioning preparations. The range of responses studied reinforces the point that conditioning controls many different types of behavior in many different species. Eye blink conditioning in rabbits. One important conditioning preparation involves the eye blink reflex in rabbits. Rabbits are habituated to mild restraint in a stock that keeps them in one place. The stock can be put in a soundproof enclosure that reduces noise and light. Then, the rabbit is exposed to brief tones and light. CS's that are paired with US's. These will be like a puff of air in the eye or a mild electric shock. The eye blink CR is actually easy to measure and observe. The simplicity and the fact that so much systematic behavioral research has been done with the eye blink method has made it possible for major headway in understanding the neutral bias of conditioning and learning. Classical conditioning has been thought to control emotional responses ever since John B. Watson in the days of behaviorism. Fear conditioning is also called threat conditioning. The rat is first trained to press a bar in a standard Skinner box for a food reward. When the rat is pressing the bar at a regular rate, the experimenter presents a light tone or noise. And then this stimulus is paired with a brief and mild electric shock delivered through the floor of the box. In the conditioned suppression situation, researchers use a standard technique to express the extent to which the CS suppresses the bar press response. Conditioned suppression has been an important method for several reasons. Fear conditioning continues to have implications for cognitive behavioral treatments of fear in clinical psychology.